First, let me welcome Andy, who's our speaker this morning, Reverend Andrew Carlson, yay. And Barbara, who's our music this morning, Barbara Wilkinson, yay. And I will now turn it over to Barbara for our prelude.
Great. Thank you, Cheryl. Good morning, everyone. I'll start our service this morning with a meditation by Manfred Schmitz.
So for our centering prayer this morning, we're going to kind of bookend the service with the prayer for protection. I'm going to do the expanded version of the prayer for protection, or read it. So if we could all just take a moment to center ourselves, perhaps take a deep breath. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. The mind of God guides us. The life of God flows through us. The power of God abides in us. The joy of God uplifts us. The strength of God renews us. And the beauty of God inspires us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. And so it is.
I always let the music speak to me, and this week I woke up thinking about a theme from one of Beethoven's sonatas. So I decided to play part of that movement for you today. It is a set of theme and variations, and I have chosen some of the more gentle variations because first I can't play the harder ones. But because I think that they will let your mind wander a bit, and I hope that you will find this theme as meaningful to you as I find it. This is Beethoven's Opus 109 in E major, Movement 2.
Thank you, Barbara. I always feel blessed to have you perform the music for the services that I'm involved in. I don't know about the rest of you, but I feel blessed.
I got it.
That was beautiful.
Yeah. Can't go wrong with Beethoven. So I'm just looking across the screen, seeing that there's, it says 31, but I think there's probably more than that, participants. some new people, like I don't know Andrea, or I don't know if I know Sarah. But it's good to see you all. So while I was, first of all, can you hear me all right? Okay. My voice is a little bit, I don't know, a little bit hoarse today, and I'm not sure if it carries very well. In planning to speak today, I really didn't know what to talk about until it came to me, which is usually how revelation happens. Many of you have known me for a long time, and that I've been on a journey for quite some time. Back in 2001, I was diagnosed as having chronic lymphocytic leukemia, and I've tried to keep that at bay by not speaking of it, not giving it reality. But over the last 5 or 6 months, it's come back, and it's caused me to re-examine my life yet again. I've had many opportunities to do that, but it's allowed me to examine it yet again, which is a blessing, because it needs examining. And apparently, if something like this doesn't come up for me, I don't really get into the weeds and look at what's showing up. So, and I'm not saying any of this to scare anybody or anything. I'm just saying what's happening, what I'm experiencing right now. The CLL, the chronic lymphocytic leukemia, it's started to come back, and night sweats and swollen lymph nodes, and my oncologist has decided it would be a good idea to go on to immunotherapy, which I've chosen to do. But in the process of doing that, I've gone back to Course in Miracles. I've gone back to the Bible. I've even, thanks to Kaywood, who gifted me a book called 100 Years of Christian Science Healing, I've actually explored Christian Science as well, and found great help there. But 2 weeks ago, I had the first immunotherapy infusion, and sitting in the chair with the tube in my arm, I didn't feel like sleeping or vegging out, so I decided to read the Bible, which is always a good thing. And while I was reading, I came across Matthew 18, verses 1 through 5, which says, "At the time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, 'Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?' He called a child whom he put among them, and he said, 'Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever becomes humble like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever welcomes one such child as in my name welcomes me.' And in that moment, it dawned on me that I was not trusting like a child. I was not trusting, but I was doubting. I was worrying. I was thinking I had the answers. I was not comprehending that in all things are possible in God. I had to ask myself, why, after all the prayer and all the study and all the meditation and seminary and all that other stuff that I've done, do I still suffer from CLL and stroke and other things? And it is because I have not become like a little child, humble and trusting and open and innocent and pure, seeing the truth of spirit, that I have yet to turn it all over to God, arrogantly thinking, I can do it myself, thus leaving God out of the equation. Now, we were talking about Romper Room a little bit earlier. I'll go back a little bit further. I think there are a lot of us that are old enough to remember the old Art Linkletter show, Kids Say the Darndest Things. And I always wondered what it was about these kids that made their answers so compelling, but I now realize that they are still the little children that Jesus speaks of that makes it so compelling. So here's a few stories that I've selected. A 7-year-old girl who was asked if she had ever been kissed calmly admitted that Billy Brown had kissed her after class. And Art Linkletter asked, well, how did that happen? And the girl said, well, it wasn't easy. I had to get my 3 girlfriends to help me catch him. Yeah, and I hear that story and just amazed at her unabashedness and her boldness. And there's the story about the art teacher who asked her children to draw. And when she asks one girl what she's doing, she says, I'm drawing God. The teacher says, but no one knows what God looks like. And the girl responded, they will in a minute. The innocence and the enthusiasm of that little girl is astounding. Then there's the story of the elderly grandmother with her little grandson who, while waiting in a line to get his face painted at the local county fair, was told by a little girl in front of him in line, you have so many freckles, you have so many freckles, there's no place to paint. This embarrassed the little boy, and he started staring at his shoes, and his grandmother knelt next to him and said, I love your freckles, dear. When I was a little girl, I always wanted freckles. They are beautiful. And the boy looked up and said, really? Yes, said the grandmother. Just name me one thing that's prettier than freckles. The little boy thought for a moment and peered intensely into his grandmother's face and replied, wrinkles. That's very loving. And the last story I'll tell you is about the little girl who was talking to her teachers about whales, and the little girl stated that Jonah was swallowed by a whale. And the teacher pointed out that the whale could not swallow a human because even though it was a very large mammal, its throat was too small. But the girl said, when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask Jonah. And the teacher asked, well, what if Jonah went to hell? Without a blink of an eye, the little girl said, then you ask him. Frank and guileless was that answer. Yes, children are innocent. And whether it be a lightning bug or a colorful bird or anything else that captures their attention, they marvel in God's creation. Children are trusting, and they rely on others to sustain them. Children are honest and bold. The child speaks from the heart, not caring what others think of them. And children are curious and eager to learn, so they ask many questions. I can remember when my children were 3 and 4 years of age, and they asked, why about everything? Why, Daddy, why? Children are naturally full of faith. They believe without any convincing to do so. And above all else, they know how to love. There are no conditions that they have that they require to love. They simply love. for the sake of loving. This childlike nature is being asked for in John 4:21 through 24, when it says, "But the time is coming, it has in fact come, when what you're called will not matter and where you go to worship will not matter. It's who you are and the way you live that count before God. Your worship must engage your spirit in the pursuit of truth. That's the kind of people the Father is looking for, those who simply and honestly are themselves before him in their worship. God is sheer being itself, spirit. Those who worship must do it out of their being, their spirits, their true selves, in adoration." Now that sounds like a description of being like a child. There are other attributes of children, childish attributes. These childish attributes include self-centeredness, whining, pouting, throwing tantrums, bullying, stubbornness, and wanting one's own way, regardless of the cost. When children want something, they can act out until they get it, frequently at someone else's expenses. Young children often cry, get mad, or outwardly petulant and pouting, and they blame someone else or they lie to stay out of trouble. It is a stark dichotomy between childlike and childish. Now, going back to that first day of sitting in an infusion chair, what I witnessed in that moment was my childishness, not my childlike nature. It stunned me, it shocked me. I wanted things my way. I wanted to be healed on my own terms. I wanted to be responsible for it, not trusting others, trusting God, not others, but trusting God. And believing that I was sick permitted me to be self-centered. Childishness also showed up in the errant belief that I, Andy, am responsible for my healing. I have errantly believed for years that my thoughts, not God's thoughts, but my thoughts, held in my mind, not God's mind, produce after their kind. If only I could control or manipulate my thoughts just so, then healing would occur. But since I was resorting to immunotherapy, I must not have been doing it right. And the guilt and shame that resulted begged the question. It's actually a song by Kenny Rogers. What condition is my condition in? What condition is my condition in? And so just we are on the same page. A condition is a limited and temporal conception, a time-bound conception of truth. Let me say that again. A condition is a limited and temporal conception of truth. For example, in my case, CLL, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, can be considered my condition, limited and time-bound. It is not something which the limited conception itself created, but it is the limited conception itself. It has no home anywhere but in the realm of chaos and confusion, in the place of opinions and conclusions, diagnoses based on a false premise. That there is a condition is all the condition there is. Listen to that again. That there is a condition is all the condition there is. So the condition The false premise is that sickness and disease are real. Matter can be injured. Death is inevitable. But if they are real, then God is false. Do I or don't I believe in the omnipresence and the omnipotence of God? Is there one power or two? Jesus saw that children knew only one. They weren't yet mesmerized, hypnotized by the world's human thinking. It is a fact that my thoughts do produce after their kind. It is a truth. But in my case, they are human thoughts, ego-driven and false, so that the results are mistaken and chaotic. Whereas God's thoughts are perfect, whole, and holy. That means God's idea of me, God's idea of you, is perfection, wholeness, and holiness. And it is perfect, whole, and holy with or without my understanding. It just is. Put simply, there is nothing that I can do to alter or affect God's idea of me, ever, ever. And if I am humble enough, if I humble myself as a little child, then that perfection is available to me. This is where healing arises, from the perfection of spirit. Jesus Christ came to forgive the sins of the world. But what are the sins he is forgiving? He is forgiving the mistaken perception that I have, that many of us have. All that can be forgiven and healed is the misperception that there can be sickness or disease, that we are bodies that can be hurt or killed, that evil exists, that we can be separate from God, our source. Jesus did not come into the world to give humans a free pass to do as they please against the will of God, thinking that they will be forgiven. In other words, given a get out of jail free card, or pardoned, which is basically the human understanding of forgiveness. There are consequences to sin, to misperceptions, my mistaken perception. The consequences of the belief and actions of separation cannot be avoided. Take my apparent disease, for example. Only by forgiveness of the mistaken perception, the realization that only God exists and that sin is illusory, does one get freed of the consequences. The problem almost everyone has with forgiveness is that we view the illusory things as the truth and the truth as an illusion. Therefore, to forgive someone's words or deeds, the illusion, the illusory truth, seems irrational and foolhardy to most. But to see the person as the image and likeness of God, Spirit, is considered an illusion and inconceivable. When we can accept that pardon is not asked for what is true, this distorted view of forgiveness can easily be corrected. Forgiveness and healing must be limited to what is false. Forgiveness and healing must be limited to what is false. It is irrelevant to everything except our illusions. Now, thankfully, Jesus Christ saw past the human condition to the truth, to the God idea of each and every person, that they are spirit and perfect in every way. it is from that vantage point that the many healings described in the Bible took place. Actually, they weren't healings, but an acknowledgement of the truth of their being. In God, all things are possible because all things are God. I am co-creator with God in so much as I let God lead the way. Jesus said, "It is not me that does the work, but my Father in heaven." My childish attempts over the years to run the show made this co-creation possible. I now see my mistaken perception and will be as a little child and trust God, trust life, and trust love. And so I'll turn back to Art Linkletter's "Kids Say the Darndest Thing" for the final bit of truth. When a 6-year-old boy was asked, "What lesson did you learn from the biblical story of David and Goliath?" the boy said, "Duck." So when you feel confronted by disease, turmoil, unease, or whatever may show up as a misperception, don't give the condition power over you. Be like the little 6-year-old boy and duck. We will go to a time of meditation. And I'm going to leave it in silence because silence is where revelation occurs, healing occurs. So as we go into silence, be as little children, childlike, trusting and honest and open. Feel what's coming up for you. Have faith that in all things, God, everything is possible in God. All things are possible in God. And let go and let God. So take a deep breath and follow it to the center of your being. Let it out with a sigh and sit in the silence for a few minutes, letting God percolate at the center of your being. Thank what has ever shown up for you this morning in the center of your being, in your heart. Bless it for the gift that it has given you. Begin to follow your breath. And over the course of next 3 breaths, allow your presence to come back into communion with the other people of the church. Come back into the room where you are in gratitude and thankfulness and love. We are so blessed. And for this, I am thankful. So it is.
Thank you so much, Andy, for that wonderful, inspiring, heartfelt message that you gifted us with this morning. And thank you so much, Barbara, for your beautiful music, as always. I remember that happiness begins within. I have the power to rise above outer influences and maintain joy. Happiness is my truth as I move through life in partnership with God. I have power over my thoughts and attitudes, and I embrace that power. I feel a new awareness of the activity of God at work in my life. And so it is.